All right, so welcome. This is our human rights panel discussion. This is intended to be the first in a series here. And I've got several panelists here. And why don't we each go around and introduce ourselves? And then the format's basically just going to be, we have a battery of questions prepared here. And we're just going to go through and, thumbs up or thumbs down to agree or disagree with each of these. There are the little react icons here. Hopefully those are coming through on the live stream. It's my first time experimenting with that particular feature on Zoom. So here we go. We're going to see if this works out. And then have any discussion. So if you have a particular point that you'd like to make for or against any of the propositions, you can raise your hand and we'll just go around the room, see what input people have, try to sample some of the for and some of the against on each of the questions. And basically the idea is get talking about human rights, get talking about those wonderful things that we are all meant to enjoy. And the channel here is Truth from Earth. I'm the host, Seth Stewart, and I'm wearing my Word Radio hat today. I'm not endorsed by their channel or anything like that. I just say the war in heaven is the war for freedom, and it's ongoing here on the earth. So that's what we're about. But let's go ahead and go around the room. Nick, do you want to go ahead and give yourself a brief introduction? Sorry, did you hear me?
All right. Is that for me?
Yeah, there you go.
Oh,
Nick Hansen. Okay. I'm going by screen names here.
That's fine. My name is actually Christopher Hansen. I don't know why Nick Hansen came up. That's my son who just died last year.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's the way it goes. I've been politically active since I was about 10, run for office, won a bunch of Nevada Supreme Court cases on political rights of people. I haven't paid income tax in 46 years. My wife told me that if I ever filed a tax return just a few months after we got married, that she would divorce me, and we're still married.
There you go. That's an incentive.
I probably know more about the Religious Freedom Restoration Act than anybody in America. And I'm very well versed on Social Security, and as Newt Gingrich just called it, the secular religion of socialism. Churches called it that too, and so I'm well versed. Wrote a book called Testament of Sovereignty. Done a lot.
Wonderful, excellent. Thanks for the introduction. And yeah, I apologize. I don't necessarily know. I can't match names to faces yet here, honestly, for the crowd. Should we go to the Drew's iPhone account here? Want to give yourself an introduction?
Okay, yeah. Boy, Mr. Hansen, that's cool. I need to talk to you. I'm Drew.
It might be painful.
Yeah. My name is Drew Chamberlain. I do pay income tax, but I'm 63, retired. I've been involved in politics a long time. I was knocking doors in Virginia when I was 11 years old for a candidate there. I was state party secretary in 2012 and served for a couple of years with Lowell Nelson, and he was vice chair. I've been Senate chair and on the state central committee in Utah for most of my life. So I try to stay local. I enjoy local politics the best, county politics.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I know Lowell. He and I have talked voting methods quite a bit.
Yes. And good.
He's got some good background there. I was wanting to participate in the debate they did a couple of years ago. I was going to go for approval because they didn't really cover that very well there.
Right.
And I found that the approval voting, there's a form of that that's actually in the Constitution. So that's an exciting topic. Cool. Yeah. Welcome, Drew. It's a really cool background. And I have this other user here. It's just the @ symbol. I think you were showing up just a moment ago.
The pretty lady, where'd she go? She saw me, it disappeared. That's what it was.
I'm still here. I'm just really camera shy.
That's okay. I am too.
Ready to be camera shy.
My name is Amy, and that @ is my initials, so that's why I use that. I'm a precinct chair, and I've been a state delegate. I'm just taking my turn, so I'm I'm feeling like I need to magnify this before I give it up in about a year. And I love to learn, and I've taught the 28 principles to a group of youth. The way of the Constitution, the way it's set up is where children are supposed to be accompanied by a parent, and then they go home and teach their family that lesson. But this was a homeschool setting because I did homeschool. I hate that term, homeschool. Home educate. I did home educate my children. Some of them, like, they wanted the public school experience, so they did try it out, but then they came back home. One went to high school because he was a handful, so he finished at the high school. And does that explain enough? I met Seth 2 weeks ago at an event, and I was among friends because we were a constitutional, conservative minded group. So I'm really grateful to have met him.
Yeah, and likewise. Thank you, Amy. Sorry, I'm not super well versed with. We've conversed online just for context here with the rest. That's kind of how I pulled this event together, and yeah, I've been talking with Amy. So yeah, she's very interested in educating people on the Constitution. So this is great. Well, without further ado, then I'm just going to go ahead and dive into some questions that I've prepared, and since. So I reached out to quite a number of people, and several of them ended up like being unavailable tonight. There was one guy who was like, "Oh, actually, I just remembered I'm supposed to host this one delegate meeting and stuff." So we come from a very politically involved group, and that's kind of what I selected for here on this, is to have people who are aware of, constitutionally literate and so on, so that we can have a good discussion here. My screen's doing a little bit of wonky stuff here with the resolution and everything, because I just plugged in a second monitor here, so bear with me while I try to get this presentation up. Just some slides to go over the questions.
So are these like trick questions?
Oh no, none of these are trick questions. I don't ask trick questions. Like, I ask questions for the purpose of learning. That's what I do. Because I want us to learn, I want us to know our rights. I want us to know other people's rights. And I do actually have some hard questions later on, if you will, right? So if you're interested in trying to tackle some more challenging questions, I figured I'd start out with just kind of some basic stuff for this first one, because I'll admit I don't entirely know what I'm getting into with these types of discussions, but I figured this would be a really good thing to just have more of a conversation on. I've spent more of my time recently actually just kind of doing spaces on X and having conversations, and those are very chill, very casual, and very camera free. And so I think they're very friendly to those of us who are camera shy, but at the same time, it's kind of sometimes a little too relaxed format. Not focused sometimes. All right, here we go. But let's go and share this. Let's see if this is working. Okay, I'm going to try to do the, let's see. I'm trying to remember how Zoom.
Oh, there it goes.
Works here. There we go. All right. Now, I'm just wanting to check here, double check, and make sure that the stream actually captures, because I seem to recall with Zoom, the stream does something weirdly different than what I see on the desktop here. So I'm just trying to get used to this. Bear with me. I need to get set up with Restream or something like that. Wanting to check here, double check, make sure. Okay, so I can see myself in the upper right corner. Oh, that's right. So that's it. It just pins me to a certain corner. I'm recollecting this, and then it's. I think it only shows the current speaker, frankly. So we're just going to go ahead and go with this. I don't know that this is actually going to show us like when everyone's hand is raised. So it'd be cool to have a really lively format where you can just see on the screen. Maybe I'll just try to toggle between the questions and the panel here. Unless there's a way to show a grid video. Does that work? No, that's just my personal view. All right, I need to talk to a Zoom expert or just use some different software here. So my apologies. We'll go ahead and just jump into that. We did our introductions, and now we'll go ahead and I just changed things, about to update. So, okay, here we go. Question number one is the bill, or proposition number one, if you will, is the Bill of Rights is a list of all of the people's rights. So it's an exhaustive list. So maybe we'll just go by ayes or nays or something like that. What do you think?
Absolutely not.
Okay, I got an absolutely not from Christopher Hansen.
Yeah, Drew, give you a nay.
Okay, Drew Chamberlain says nay. Amy, what do you think?
I think it is a list of rights.
Well, the question is, it's a list of all of the people's rights.
All of what people? Americans or?
You found a weakness in the question already.
Yeah.
Let's limit it to Americans for this question, since the Bill of Rights is a U.S. constitutional thing that I'm referencing here. You can also decline to answer a question if you think it's a trick question or whatever.
Is there a comma after all?
There's no comma.
Because it'd be the list of all of the people's rights. So the people would be everyone.
Oh, yeah, I see. Okay.
So is
Okay,
it a list?
we already have a syntax
Is
ambiguity.
it a complete list?
Yeah, so, yeah, I would phrase it this way. The Bill of Rights is an exhaustive list of all of the rights that we, the people of the United States of America, hold.
Yeah, it's a no.
Okay. All right, Amy, do you want to weigh in on that with a clarification on the question there? Not we'll.
I guess there's more than this list.
Okay, so that's a no.
Right.
Okay, super. All right, I'm a no on this also. So I think this was probably just a really easy question, because, and I'm just going to raise my hand and try to explain my point of view on it, is to say that, you know, the Bill of Rights, like the Constitution doesn't exist to, you know, tell us what all of our rights are. We have rights, and the Constitution exists to protect those rights. And rights are practically infinite as far as I'm concerned. The only exception to that is things that are wrong. Like that's my view on it from a basic perspective. Is we have a right to do things that are right. We don't have a right to do things that are wrong.
The Bill of Rights is a good start.
Yeah.
In 1789, Mr. Sedgwick, one of the founding fathers, said that if the committee were governed by that general principle, they might have gone into a very lengthy enumeration of rights. They might have declared that a man should have the right to wear a hat if he pleased.
Right.
So, yeah, and the Ninth Amendment also covers it because it says that all the rights that aren't included, obviously saying that there are others that aren't included, are not to be disparaged by anything else. So no, it absolutely, the Ninth Amendment says it doesn't cover all of them.
Yeah, very good.
Excellent. Yeah, so I'm a computer programmer, so there's like a pointer at the end that says there's more, right?
Right.
So
Very good.
and so on ad infinitum, right? So I think we all agree on that. The fact that something doesn't appear in the Bill of Rights doesn't mean you don't have a right to do it. Okay, so there's no opposition, and nobody's taking that position. So what do we do here?
Go to number two.
Go to number two. All right, cool. We could try to play devil's advocate, but I just can't.
No.
I can't argue something that I don't believe in. Okay, I'm not very good at that. Number two, human rights come from God. Amy, let's start with you.
Inalienable rights come from God.
Inalienable rights. Okay. We might revisit that in a second. Drew?
Yeah, I would say no.
You'd say human rights don't come from God?
Right.
Okay. All right, Christopher?
Declaration of Independence is pretty clear. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, not inalienable, unalienable. Used
Right. I
specifically.
agree.
Yeah, they were used specifically. That word was invented by the authors of the Declaration of Independence because they wanted it stronger than inalienable. So there you go.
It's a great point. All right. Well, now that I'm the last one on this, so I get to just cherry pick from all your answers and just say I agree with that. That from the Declaration of Independence, expressly states that those rights come from God, and I would submit that all human rights do come from God. Let's see. I guess I should just round out that thought. Albert Mueller gave a talk at a BYU forum address a number of years ago, and he said that our human rights come from God, and that if we were mere animals, then we would not have that additional dignity and those additional rights. Our human rights would be indistinguishable from animal rights if we were not actually children of God, and I concur with that. I thought that was a good observation. But all human beings, just by virtue of being human beings, we're created equal, and we're all endowed by our Creator with those same unalienable rights. All right, let's go back around the room.
Now, can you keep them?
Now, can you keep them? Can you guard them?
He doesn't keep them for us.
He lets us guard them. That's true. And there you go. You just solved the problem of evil.
I did that long ago.
Should we add that to the video thumbnail? Yeah. If anybody's looking for an answer to that question, you just answered it in like 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Very good. All right. Any other remarks? Drew?
No.
Okay. Amy?
No, that's great.
Okay. So I will follow up with you though. I noticed that you said, well, wait a minute. Drew, you said no to the question. You said human rights don't come from God. Can you clarify? Is that?
Let's see. Human rights. Yeah, but yeah, I guess did I say no?
I think so. I raised an eyebrow and I said we'll come back to that. We'll revisit that. It's a little bit harder. Maybe let's go ahead and make use, even though it's not showing up on the live stream. I don't think what our reactions are. Let's go ahead and try to use those anyway, maybe for each question, so we can just like mentally keep better track.
Yeah, and I was thinking, human rights come from God, and they're not human; they're God-given rights. So
okay. Well, I would maybe just let me ask for clarification there, because I would say that animal rights are also God-given because God created animals too, right? So what's the distinction then between animal rights and human rights?
Boy, that's an interesting question.
Well, but our laws are in reference to nature's God.
Yeah, that's right.
So doesn't that include animals?
Yeah, it does. And nature means birth, so all of living things that have some ancestors, I guess, could qualify. I'm trying to figure out where my reaction buttons went. Maybe they're in this little thing. I need to go back to full screen. Okay, there we go. It's kind of hard for me to be full screen and docked because I'm going back and forth with the slides. Okay. All right. But anyway, I would submit that there is. I've heard some people try to differentiate between the word person and human, claiming that person and human are distinct legal categories. I guess this is maybe just kind of a spontaneous sub-question. Do we agree or disagree with that premise?
I self-identify as a person.
I identify as a person too. I claim all the rights that pertain to persons.
And a human.
And to human beings. I'm both of those.
I self-identify as a human.
Okay, so is there no disagreement that person equals human for purposes of inheritance of rights?
No disagreement. And I tend to follow the Bible where it says he and not she. So I'm not offended.
Oh yeah, well, okay, and just to be super clear on like biblical pronouns, and you can find this in like the German language and Spanish and many other languages, a lot of the pronouns are actually gender collective. That is to say, if you don't know the gender of someone and you say he, and that could just as well refer to a woman or whatever. In Spanish, like él and ellos, ellos is the it's the plural term for men, but it's also the plural term for a group of men and women. And you can even go back to the original language on that. You can quote me on that. The word Adam actually refers to both Adam and Eve collectively.
Yes.
So that's a
Fantastic.
fun one. Yep. So mankind, right? All right. So yeah, human beings. Yeah, we do have distinct rights from animals because we're children of God. That's what I would submit as my thesis. Any other comments on number 2 before we go on? Okay,
No.
cool. I guess I would just further clarify what this also means to me is governments don't grant human rights. Human rights pre-exist government. If you don't have any organized government whatsoever, you don't belong to any nation, you still have human rights. It's not the government that's creating them for you or giving them to you.
You get to keep those rights as long as the Vikings don't show up.
Or a number of other groups, right, that are
Right.
unsavory towards that attitude. And yeah, the concept of human rights, it's so amazing that we're able to have this discussion, by the way. I just want to just zoom out and be like, it's so amazing that we live in a time where human rights have been discovered, shall we say, established, their existence has been established, and they have had protections set in place by the founding fathers of the United States and others who sought to have those freedoms respected because, well, I guess they weren't being respected, as we know from various experiences on this earth. All right, question number 3. Sorry, I'm like window juggling here and bouncing the mouse back and forth because I've got screens here, but here we go. Governments are allowed to do things not expressly written in their constitutions. Agree or disagree?
Governments are absolutely allowed to do anything they want at all. Doesn't matter what their constitution says. They do what they want, and the only way. Now, if the word was legal, that would be different. But allowed, yeah, they've been allowing to do things like verbicide the word welfare in the 1930s. So then they went ahead and created the welfare state. They changed the First Amendment so that it applies to the states when it never should have been, and it wasn't written in the 14th Amendment that it should apply to the states, but the Supreme Court changed it because they wanted to. So then we were stuck with it. So yeah, no, they do anything they want.
Well, yeah, but those are interpretations. And if the Constitution was written in such a way that it couldn't be interpreted except in the way it was proposed to be, then the answer is no, because governments can only do what is in the Constitution for that government.
No, they can do anything.
But in reality, they do whatever they want.
Legally. It's whether they do it legally or not. The
yes.
word allowed is the wrong word there.
Yeah, but in the purest sense of the question, the answer is no. The governments are allowed to do things not expressly written in the Constitution. It's a no. They can only do what's in the Constitution.
Yeah, so maybe I should clarify and just say, maybe the question here is allowed by whom, right?
And the
Do they allow themselves to, right?
Constitutions were written to limit the power of government.
They were. And I would even say they were written to delegate power to the people. Sorry, to the government. Let me let's go to Amy because sorry, I'm jumping into this discussion already before we've each given an answer. Thumbs up or thumbs down on it.
They certainly have been given a power while in office, and Utah's facing quite a bit of interpretation in different ways. So that's really frustrating to me as a precinct chair, and well, because they're interpreting things that like from law code, and honestly, if you want to get into it, like, I think that the election ballot was fraudulent because of interpretation.
Okay, so
Right.
you're talking about the Spencer Cox thing?
Yes, well,
Okay.
the 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 discussion with my neighbors began because Lucifer was on this ballot, and
Oh, for the presidential election.
right, and then
Yeah.
more and more discussion was interesting. I guess the candidate, actually legally changed his name to to that, what was on printed on the ballot. But yeah, I there's a difference of opinion as to whether or not, um, Cox should have been on the primary ballot, because it didn't indicate, Phil Lyman, because he was the nominee from that party who produced that primary ballot.
Yeah, that's a great point. I have a series of videos where I go into Phil Lyman's the Phil Lyman versus Cox thing, and let me just say it does boil down to the fact that the government is trying to assert and exercise a power that the people never granted the government, namely the power to take away our representative voice and give it to someone else or some other organization. That's inherent in the process of political parties having a role in elections. The minute the government gives them a role in the election process to where there's an unequal track to access the ballot, it's just like Animal Farm, where it's like all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And that's what the
Right.
party system creates is they become part of the government. They're not actually citizen run. They're not responsive to the people, and that's why we don't get what we want in our
Right.
elections.
And I think it started to wake people up in our state, and when, Governor Cox, changed the flag. He didn't give Utah a vote on which flag they wanted because they knew which flag we wanted to keep. So,
Yeah, I think the people should decide what the flag of the state is, not the governor. That's my take. But yeah, and this is Utah politics for those who are maybe listening and don't know what we're talking about. This is Utah politics for the last little bit here. I would amend one other statement, though. I would submit that Lucifer appeared on the presidential ballot at least 3 times, not just once. But I digress.
oh, okay. Thank you.
Turkey.
All right. Do we want other discussion on this point? Just
I would say the other word is expressly written. No, expressly written is not a good word there because the Constitution grants powers, but it doesn't expressly write everything to control each and everything.
that's right. That's why there are laws that are supposed to be made pursuant to the Constitution.
So,
Right?
so
Right.
they're not expressly written in the Constitution.
That's
It
right.
allows us to make laws. So
And it should be noted also that it's human nature to cheat.
yes,
And so when people go outside their authority under the Constitution, that's cheating, and they all do it. But
yes,
it's kind of in our nature to try to cheat, to try to get away with something, especially in politics. And I see it at every level. It doesn't matter if it's in your precinct or in the state legislature or Congress. They're always trying to get away with something. And the Constitution was written to try to limit that. It did a pretty good job, but we still cheat. Maybe we can just add another amendment. Cheating is not allowed. Stop it.
Cheating is not allowed, right? Well, and this implies the need for checks and balances, which is really like what the Constitution is designed to do. Is like have somebody guard the hen house who's not the fox, and then have somebody watch the one who's guarding the hen house, and then you have who's watching the watchers, right? Is really the conundrum that I think constitutional charters are designed to resolve. I do want to make one quick comment too on this point of like the Constitution like doesn't specify all the laws of your government, but like I kind of view it as a cylinder of power, right? You have this base, you have this, I don't know, a Lego base plate or a piece of real estate, and you're allowed to build up vertically from there. That's the lane that the government is granted to drive in, but they're not allowed to step even a toe outside of that. You have these power structures that can be just totally invented as a sidecar to that. And if it's not grounded in that, if it's like Wile E. Coyote just ran off the cliff and there's nothing underneath him, doesn't have basis in the Constitution, it's not legitimate.
Should be
We
null.
did not delegate that power to them. All right, more on checks and balances in a minute. Should we go on to question 4?
Sure.
Okay, that's an I. All right, number 4. If something doesn't hurt anyone else, it's your right. Agree or disagree? Let's try to just dogpile this one.
Well, then we get into moral virtues, don't we, on this question?
Well, we're talking about human rights, right? So if it's the right of a human being to do something, if something doesn't hurt anyone else, does that include, does that not violate the definition of human rights?
No.
No, I think it's a correct question.
Okay. So if something doesn't hurt anyone else, then it's the person's right.
The question is, what doesn't hurt someone else? There are so many ways to hurt someone. You can hurt someone, let's say you own a big piece of property and you have a pig ranch. Are you hurting anybody else? Not if you're all alone, but if a bunch of houses are downwind from you, now you're
people.
Yeah, there you go.
Things change with immorality hurts the whole nation. A nation that was set up for Christianity in a nation of pagans doesn't work very well. John Adams warned us against that, said that this nation was founded really only for Christian and is useless to anybody else. So the question is, yes, as long as you're not hurting anybody, it shouldn't be a problem. But the question is, how many alternatives are there and ways that you can hurt somebody? Can you hurt somebody by intentionally creating inflation? Yeah, you stole from them. But, there's all these little, it's very hard to live every day and not hurt somebody by doing something. The butterfly effect.
Yeah, and people would argue that, that free climbing, I can free climb, it doesn't hurt anybody. But when I fall off and I get injured, then an ambulance has to come and take care of me and I go to a hospital. A lot of people pay for that, not me. So I'm hurting other people.
Yes, good example.
All right, Amy, do you have any thoughts, input?
Well, abortion comes to mind. People are trying to skew the idea of life, and I believe it starts at conception. So
it certainly hurts somebody else, doesn't it?
Well, that's a question too. Does it hurt somebody if the spirit is taken back up into heaven so that child doesn't have to be born to a mother that would abort it? And then that spirit gets a chance to come back down again into another body. So which one is hurt more, to be born or to be aborted by a mother that's so hateful she'd kill her own child? Those are those deep questions that come into where we do things. Jesus Christ spoke to the people in the Americas the day before he was born. So he certainly wasn't locked into the body. And by the church, you don't record a stillborn.
That's
so
right.
Once again, those are real delicate moral questions. And that's the reason that people get together and go, we want to do this, we want to do that. That's why we have that level of democracy, is to discuss those very, very difficult issues.
Well, and I would submit that there's also self-harm, and and plus which is one of the reasons why abortion is morally wrong is obviously that it's the willful destruction of a human life, right? But also, there's no guarantee that that person's spirit did not enter the body. So regardless of what one's theological ideas, it is a human being, human life that's being destroyed. But there's also self-harm, right? And this is one reason why I would actually say no. It's not the case that if something doesn't hurt someone else, then it's your right, because self-harm is also not a right. I would not categorize that as a right. And a lot of libertarians might disagree with me on that. But you know, there are a lot of things that people claim are so-called victimless crimes and stuff. And in reality, every person, you know, the very nature of mortality is every person born into the world has a father and a mother. We are all connected. There's no such thing as self-harm that doesn't actually impact someone else. That just doesn't exist. No man is an island. We didn't come into being into this mortal probation just by like sprouting up even you know, mushroom spores, fungus and stuff. That has a progenitor, you know, and so we can't disclaim responsibility for the chain chain effect that has, the what's what I'm looking, chain reaction that self-harm causes. Even if you say that, oh, I'm the only buddy who's being hurt by this, you know, you're still impacting future generations yet unborn. And so, like, you know, you can't legislate people into prosperity. You can't like just have an injunction that says thou shalt keep the parable of the talents and enforce that by law. That doesn't work. But I would submit that no, we don't have. It's not really a right. But at the same time, there are a lot of things that are maybe unenforceable when it comes to wrongs. There's some things that should have laws protecting, and other things that, you know, that are wrong, but there's no law against, like people believing different things. There's no law against people believing that the earth is flat or whatever. So we can't do mind control or anything like that. That's a separate question, though.
These are all really good points. But I point out that too, that going back to natural law and how that is part of this. There are two great commandments of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind. And then thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. These two commandments are the foundation of natural law. And the natural law is something that is embedded in the Constitution.
Yes, that's a great point. And I would submit natural law, you can actually kind of, I've done this exercise before. Others might have gone about it differently, but you can take the 10 commandments that Moses received in Sinai and allocate them to say this goes under the first great commandment, this is loving God, and take them and say, okay, this one is specifically loving my neighbor. In reality, of course, if you're loving your neighbor, you are also loving God. But you know, one of the purposes of government, of course, isn't to dictate private devotion, but at the same time establish those parameters for people to treat each other kindly, because reciprocity in the mortal sense is something that you can directly measure. You can feel, you can sense how you treat someone else. If you're treated that same way, you get a very quick sense for that. You have the immediacy of that. Anyways, I think we're going to move on to the next question, so we make sure we get time for all of them. These are really good discussions. These are actually, we're developing these ideas a little bit more than I thought we might. That's good.
Did you go ahead?
Yeah, let's see. Number 6. A government can rightly disclaim jurisdiction over its subjects.
You missed number 5.
Oh, did I miss number 5? Where did it go?
Rights
think
and
you clicked
privileges
through it.
are the same thing.
Oh yeah, hang on. I think I double clicked. Sorry. Rights and privileges are the same thing. Yay or nay?
Absolutely yes, absolutely no. Depends on where you go to get their definition. If you go to the Supreme Court said that we have rejected the concept that there's a difference between a right and a privilege. And then, of course, that was in Border Regents versus Roth in 1972. And then there's the question of whether or not, if Congress grants a privilege like they did to the people in the Philippine Islands and gave them religious liberty like the First Amendment, they had to give that to them. And then the Supreme Court said that they can't take it away after they give it to them. It was a privilege when they gave it to him, and then it was changed to a right because they can't legally take the privilege away, which gets into, of course, the issue of driver's licenses. If driver's license is a privilege and they give it to you, then does it become a right? And then can it be taken away from you? All kinds of really very interesting thoughts on that.
Okay. All right, Drew, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I would say no. Rights and privileges are different.
Okay, do you want to explain?
Well, a right is God given, a privilege is government given.
Okay. Amy, do you have a thought on this?
I agree with Drew.
Okay. So my take's a little bit different here. I would submit rights are God-given, right? So a government, I don't know, kind of to your point, Christopher. I would say that that case that has me a little bit annoyed, honestly, that the government thinks that they can grant a privilege, which could then morph into a right because the right was inherent, right? The people already had the right. Maybe the government recognized the right. That's how I would state that. But the divide I would put between rights and privileges. So privilege means private law, and in contrast to rights, a privilege is something that is conferred by a private entity upon some other entity, right? It's like with property. I get to decide what to do with my own things. If it's my house, it's my rules, kind of thing, right? And that means I have the privilege. I can confer the privilege on someone else of inviting them over for dinner. They can confer the privilege on me of, granting me some special benefit, going to, I don't know, go skydiving. I don't know, take piano lessons. We can give each other things, right? But governments aren't really in the business of granting privileges. Privileges exist within the framework of rights, because whatever you have a privilege to do, you also have a right to do. But you can't take anyone's privilege and then just seize that for public use, or say, well, hey, take the diversity, equity, and inclusion argument, right? Say, hey, Jimmy, you gave Sally a piece of gum. That means you owe Bobby a piece of gum too, right? It doesn't work that way. And so,
Right. I I
go ahead, Amy.
well I had a similar experience as a parent and parenting my children as opposed to someone else's parenting, where another parent gave her child or children, they all got a green sucker. Well, that's not how I operate with my children. Just because one gets something, they don't all get the same thing.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and that's the point. That we have to have this conversation almost every day with our kids, because we only have one of this little green lollipop, and it's not that divisible, and it creates huge problems of entitlement among the children in this world, so to speak, right? And I think this is one of the things that's gotten really dangerous with governments, actually, is because it can be very popular to say, oh, look at those people, they have those privileges, we need those privileges too. And the thing with privileges is you don't go rob them from other people, you have to go build them yourself, because they're the exact same thing as private property. Private law is governed by is exactly the principle that governs private property, and so it's part of our liberty, it's part of our right to property, and so on.
We have to remember that this is the United States of America. And in the United States of America, the Bill of Rights does not apply to territories. So when Utah was a territory and the federal government came in and said, you don't have the right to freedom of religion, Congress had the right to say that to all of the people that were out in Utah. It's the same thing that happened with the Philippines and with all of the territories, because in the territories, Congress is king. There is no absolute right to anything because Congress can do anything. If they say you don't have a right to life, Congress could literally have the right to take that away, take away your land, take away your right to religion. That's in our Constitution right now. So privileges can be granted, and the government does have the right to bestow governmental rights upon people that then cannot be taken away without due process of law. So, like I said, it's a complicated question, and the Supreme Court, which we're supposed to recognize as the interpreter of the Constitution, is very clear that we have wiped away, what do you call it? The basis of this holding has been thoroughly undermined in the ensuing years. For, as Mr. Justice Blackmun wrote, this court has now rejected the concept that constitutional rights turn upon whether a governmental benefit characterized as a right or as a privilege. So there is a lot of legal discussion on that goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And there's no doubt about King Congress. King Congress can tell people what to do.
So maybe we should pause and just take a vote on this additional proposition we just heard here. Do people in territories, does the Bill of Rights apply to them? Do they have those same rights as anyone else?
Absolutely not. Congress, the Supreme Court is clear, and the Constitution is clear. They're not protected.
Well, I might beg to differ, in part for the reason that many of the rights addressed in the Bill of Rights are human rights and not only, if you will, civil rights. In fact, my feeling is that the whole civil rights discussion is kind of misguided because it tends to entrench the notion that governments are what grant the rights. For example, I believe that a person living in a territory of the United States has the right to be presumed innocent rather than presumed guilty in any kind of criminal proceeding, right? And there needs to be some kind of protection for that. The government is actually obligated to protect that person's sovereignty, that person's autonomy, that person's right to be presumed. They actually have to prove that he committed a crime still. There has to be due process. Anyways, that's one of my thoughts.
I would agree that your way is better, but what I'm saying is that under our Constitution, that's not the rule.
Is the premise of that, though, the assertion that the judiciary is responsible to interpret the Constitution?
No, not necessarily. It's right in the Constitution. Congress has powers over the territories, and throughout history, with all the wars that we've had, with the war with Spain, with taking over the island of Hawaii, when we completely stripped the sovereign that was there and stole Hawaii, and all of the things that we've done. Now, Congress has, in general, like they do with the Philippines, they gave the Filipinos the king of Spain would not sign the treaty unless Congress said that they would grant the freedom of religion, because most of the people over there in the Philippines were Catholic that were underneath the control of the king of Spain. So if you look at the history of the United States, normally those things are granted, just like you were talking about the right of the presumption of innocence. Those are granted. But King Congress in the territory is exactly that, and he's not a limited king. I don't like it, but that's the way it's written.
So I'm not finding where in the Constitution it says that. The only mention of territories that I find in the Constitution proper before the Bill of Rights and amendments is in Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2. It says the Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States.
All needful rules.
But that's
rules.
That's respecting territory and property, though. I don't see that as a blanket permission to, trammel the religious freedom of people who happen to be living in a territory. I would call that kind of legal interpretation highly suspect, honestly.
Well, they wrote all over the right of John Taylor to be a polygamist.
There's a lot more that I could read on that subject, but there's been a lot of really interesting. They did treat themselves as though they were kings, but I'm not seeing that in the Constitution anywhere. I see that they can make rules for the disposition of the land itself, but they're not allowed to just treat the people as subhuman, basically, and say you're not allowed to practice your religion because you're in a territory. I just don't see that.
I've studied the issue for about 35 years, and I don't like what was done, but the use of that power has been very clear. They have the right to do dang near anything they want. It's awful as far as I'm concerned, but.
Well, I never delegated that power to them, so maybe you and I should have a more lengthy discussion, conversation, debate on this. My trajectory, my study of the history of the church and the change, the drift in the way we viewed rights over time has been centered on the topic of jury trial and elections. Those have been the two main topics that I've gotten into, and just the way they treated the territory was abominable, but it actually set the precedent for the almost complete erasure of the right of jury trials today. So more on that on another discussion. But
there was a big win on that recently with the 7th Amendment, by the way, at the Supreme Court.
Do you want to catch me up on civil suits? The
The Supreme Court ruled that the Seventh Amendment is in effect on the federal government. When the federal government goes after somebody, that they have the right to a jury trial. Just happened within the last 2 years, I believe. Major victory. And then there was the wonderful Chevron decision, which my family was fighting for 30 years, which allows the federal government, the executive branch, to make all the regulations, and those are supposed to be the same as law. And the Supreme Court came in the Chevron decision, overturning an older decision that said no, they don't have the right to go and do more things as far as control of people than what is set by Congress. So it was a huge win on the Seventh Amendment.
Okay, so I would have some. So you're saying that the Supreme Court ruled that the government, when it's suing somebody civilly, has a right to a jury trial, not the people.
Other way around too. People have a right to a jury trial. Anything more than $20. Of course, if you can define a dollar, you're amazing.
Well,
but
yeah, obviously,
yeah. You get a jury trial if you demand. If you demand.
Yeah, I can define a jury per the sorry, a dollar per the Constitution, but yeah, there's a very interesting. This is a very interesting topic. I really do have a lot more that I'd like to discuss on this. Maybe we can hang around after and just expound this one a little bit more.
Sure.
But because I'm actually following several suits right now and laws, bills that are on the table that could erase more of the right of the people to access juries. So I'm honestly raising an eyebrow of suspicion when you say that. I'm like, wait, they didn't erase our rights further? I'm skeptical.
I'll tell you, that was a huge win on the Seventh Amendment. Really was big, yeah.
Okay, well, you can catch me up maybe in the after chat here. So any other comments? Did we even get around to everybody? I forgot where we're at. Rights and privileges are the same. We already all stated an opinion on this, right? And
Right.
now we're just kind of riffing it. So should we go on to the next question?
Yes.
No objections. Okay, number 6. Pardon me for a second here. A government can rightfully disclaim jurisdiction over its subjects.
Can you explain disclaim?
Disclaim as in you are a subject of a certain government, and then who knows, some controversy comes up or they don't like you anymore, and so they're just like, hey, you are now nationally orphaned. We're not going to protect you. We're not going to uphold your rights. I could have clarified this question or refined it further, honed it by saying citizens, but maybe we can have the conversation of citizens versus subjects. But basically, can a government just take anybody who is under its jurisdiction and then just suddenly say, oh, no, we're not going to have anything to do with you?
Well, we might see if that happens if Denmark sells Greenland to the United States. Huh?
Okay, so naturalization.
Denmark would no longer, they would disclaim the people that are in Greenland, and the United States would pick them up. But does Greenland have the right to sell Greenland? Does Denmark have the right to sell Greenland to the United States? Question. I don't know. I never seen the question. I found it fascinating.
That's a fair question. I mean, to be fair, the Latter-day Saint pioneers became subjects to the United States after they had exited all the way to Mexico just within a year later. I think it was 9 months, and then by the Mexican cession, they became subjects again. So they were reclaimed, right? The question is, can they be disclaimed?
I would have to say that, especially if they're in a territory, if the government wants to sell the territory, if the government of France wants to sell the Louisiana territory to the United States, those are no longer French citizens, and they're required to be United States citizens. So I think that you can do that. It depends on the circumstances, but can it happen legally? Yes.
Okay. That's a fair point. Maybe discuss that a little bit more. But Drew and Amy, what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, good example. It did happen. If we wanted to sell Alaska, we could sell it.
There you go.
So that's sell it to Russia, and then, sorry, I shouldn't even suggest that.
Yeah.
I could get in trouble with geopolitics and diplomacy here, but anyways.
So rightfully meaning legally.
I would say not only legally, but like strictly legally as grounded in like the Constitution and with having absolute respect for people's rights. Rightfully, no one's rights have been harmed.
That's a tough one because in certain circumstances, it happens.
Okay, so
We're having that difficulty with the sovereignty of the Indian nations right now. Where do you go to trial? That's been a huge issue in Oklahoma for the last several years. Are you a United States citizen and under the jurisdiction of the United States, or are you a member of the Blackfeet tribe and under their jurisdiction? And down in Oklahoma, that's a huge question because the governor of Oklahoma is fighting the sovereign nation of, I forget which nation they're fighting. It's not the Sioux, it's somebody else, but Cherokee. They're fighting the Cherokee Nation on that. So can the government say you're not a United States citizen if you're claiming to be the citizen of the Cherokee Nation? I don't know.
I would say they cannot.
so they can't disclaim them.
Could they disclaim Alaska if we sold it to Russia?
I think we're talking about individuals here, but
Yeah, we are talking about individuals, and to your point about territories, yes, the United States has, the United States can sell its territories. I'm not sure what the legal requirements would be to sell a state. I think that would be a much higher hurdle. The state would have to like willingly secede from the union or some other kind of schism. I don't know.
I agree. You couldn't just sell a state, no.
But if you're in a territory, the territory can exchange hands. And I did look at like with the Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty, just looking at the other side of the Mexican cession, they had an arrangement where the Mexicans who were residents on that land could have they were given a year to say either pack up and move down to Mexico,
right,
where the border where the boundary had moved, go back across the border into Mexico and remain Mexican citizens, or else stay here for a year and become naturalized citizens of the United States.
right.
And so that was a very fascinating thing. You brought up the various Indian nations and tribes. That's another thing I've been looking at with the whole immigration question. Because prior to, I don't remember the exact year, but it was in the early 1900s, that there was a law passed by Congress that granted automatic citizenship to all of the Indians. And prior to that time, they were not regarded as citizens of the United States necessarily. There may have been some naturalization going on there. But like we've actually had non-citizens just kind of roaming semi-freely through our nation for like well over 100 years after our nation was formed. So it's kind of an interesting topic as we're talking about jurisdictions. We're talking about, their sovereignty, the ability to disclaim their jurisdiction, and so on. But yeah. My take on this is no, that the government cannot proactively, disclaim its jurisdiction over any of its subjects or citizens. That would have to come from the subject or citizen himself, as in saying, hey, I want to be naturalized a citizen of a different country or something like that. And even if there's dual citizenship, there's still...
I would say individually, you're absolutely right. They can't just disclaim you individually.
Right.
Individually. But as a group, yeah, they could.
as a group, yeah.
Well, if you're on a territory and they sell a territory to someone else, then they could it would have to be a reasonable rule, obviously, to say either you remain here and assimilate or whatever and be subject to this foreign power, or else you remain here. The idea, though, being that people shouldn't fall through the cracks. You shouldn't have this situation where government's just kind of like, you went into foreign territory and we just don't care about your rights anymore. We're not going to stick up for your rights, or within our own borders even, just being like, okay, we're just going to treat you as subhuman because we don't care about you, right? That's kind of what this question is asking.
Right.
So what about birthright citizenship? That's an issue right now. Can President Trump just say, if you claim birthright citizenship, you're no longer a citizen? Or is he saying from this point on, there's no citizen birthright?
So I did a video on Trump's executive order on the 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship, and there is a no ex post facto clause in there that says, I forget what the time period is, but from 30 days or whatever from the date of this order, it will take effect and so on. So people who have already been acknowledged as having citizenship, that this doesn't retroactively deny that. My huge concern with that one, actually, though, is the fact that by singling out the phrase and not subject to the jurisdiction thereof in the 14th Amendment, Trump's executive order actually explicitly creates a jurisdictional gap for the children of non-citizens.
Yes.
As in it states that, and this is my issue, is because there's actually a double meaning behind jurisdiction. What the United States Constitution has to say about jurisdiction is in Article 3. It's the jurisdictional clause. It's clause and a half, I think, on the judiciary and its ability to hear cases and controversies. And that means if you're in a controversy with the United States, you're a defendant, your defendant rights attach, right? And so, but the way the so-called originalist interpretation of the authors of the 14th Amendment said that basically subject to the jurisdiction thereof meant you were a bona fide subject of that realm. You were recognized as having it basically accorded the rights of citizenship. And I'm just like, well, that's not the same argument, because the jurisdictional clause of the Constitution expressly grants the United States courts jurisdiction in cases to which foreign citizens and subjects may be a party, to which United States citizens are also a party. And so by injecting that wording, if we just ignore that there are two meanings of that word, then a judge could look at that clause and he could say, well, yeah, we have this family, and the parents are eligible for deportation, but we can't do anything about the kids because they're not subject to our jurisdiction. So what happens to the kids? It's a recipe for separating families, and that's what got me really concerned about that, to the point where I did a whole video on it.
Well, considering the 14th Amendment probably was never ratified, it becomes an even bigger question.
No doubt, but and you see that the people who wrote these amendments, this is true of a lot of the amendments. There are these poison pills in there. They'll go ahead and affirm something that's completely redundant, like the 14th does with the 5th. Without due process of law, you're not allowed to take da. And then they just, so that it sounds really nice, but they're like, and not subject to the jurisdiction. What does that even mean? That can't possibly mean like that's a meaningless phrase. And so when they tried to,
if a person from Panama that is an ambassador from Panama comes up here with his wife and she has a kid, and she has it at the local hospital in Washington, D.C., then is that child a United States citizen? And I would have to say no, because the key jurisdiction is the home jurisdiction. Right. Well, it's a very technical legal question that we'll get to watch happen, won't we? Yeah.
Well, I'm not convinced we'll even get to watch. A lot of this happens behind closed doors, where the citizens can't actually audit the process and form a check.
It should be before the Supreme Court.
I'm talking about the cases individually, though. I'm talking about how the judges will, in these more private decisions, will settle the matter. I get very concerned when there's a judge and a prosecutor facing somebody. Was that?
Yeah. It takes time. You can look up just about everything. It's all open.
Well, not at the lower court levels. There are a lot of courts that are not of record even, and that's part of my concern here. Anyways.
Federal district courts are.
Yes.
Decided.
Should be, yes. But yeah, we need the ability to audit that process, basically, is part of my concern. I don't want people just going around saying, oh, they're not subject. But yeah, the birthright citizenship, so there are two different theories of it. One is that it's your parents' home country that you're naturalized to, and the other is it's the land you're born on. And the land you're born on is how some have interpreted the 14th Amendment, and I just don't buy into that at all. So people think I'm a leftist because I have concerns about Trump's executive order on it. And I'm just like, no, my concern is about the Constitution. My concern is, are we holding to the Constitution? I'm not at all saying these people should have birthright citizenship.
Right.
So we can probably have more discussion like that on that topic too afterwards. But I think this has been really good discussion on this one. Did we get to Amy and Drew? Sorry, I'm losing track of where we are. Sorry, we can't hear you very well, Amy.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I think there's a voice in the background somewhere.
I'm just gonna reserve to the end, because I think that the government has a role in protecting the family, because they well, we can move on to the next question, because I because because there is so much more we could discuss.
There totally is. Yeah. Sorry, I was just getting a drink of water. But yeah, the government is responsible to respect families, and that's so whatever legal loopholes there are ostensibly that is actually the reason why I brought up this question, is because if you create a jurisdictional gap for people to fall through, for those who subscribe to the theory that governments grant rights, what they're basically doing is they're denying that person their human rights. They're saying you don't have human rights because we refuse to protect you. You're not under our jurisdiction or whatever. But we could still, who knows what happens to them? Just get trafficked or sold or who knows what.
Do you get a right? Do you get a right when you become a citizen?
I would say that citizenship confers the privileges of citizenship, right? That's the one venue in which governments can grant privileges.
Can they take it away after it's granted?
No.
What's a privilege that can't be taken away if it's not a right?
It's a right. It's unalienable. Well, maybe to put it this way, if we're talking about natural rights, and you're naturalized a citizen of a certain country, or you're naturally born a citizen, then those are by definition natural rights, are they not? Rights come in families.
No, I don't think so.
Maybe? You don't think so?
No, I don't think so.
Why not?
Well, a natural right is something that comes from nature, and government is not of nature. So when it's granted and you're naturalized by the government, not by nature. So
would you say, okay, go ahead.
It's granted and it becomes a right, because then you have a right as a citizen. So the privilege becomes a right.
Okay. Maybe we'll have to structure some more conversation on this one around rights and privileges and what you inherit. Because I would maybe just try to rationalize it this way. This is a fun thought exercise. We have human rights because we're children of God, right? And in that sense, it is we're born having it, right? It is by virtue of our birth, but that you could also have rights in a sense because you're born in a certain family. I don't know. Maybe that's just totally wrong.
You're not given rights a child that's born in communist China has right now. Maybe they're supposed to have them, but do they actually?
They should be. They're born having them, is what the Declaration of Independence says.
At birth, I guess. I don't know.
Well, people and governments can fail to honor rights. Obviously, that's an issue that people can face in any country, and we're facing it here, and that's my context for a lot of this. Anyways, I guess I'm just kind of, the jury's still out in my head on the question of, do governments actually legitimately grant anything that could properly be called a right, or could parents confer a right upon you that was not already yours because you're a child of God?
Fascinating question.
All right, maybe we'll cue that up for a more detailed discussion later on. Let me go on to the next question then. Okay, number 7. We need a government department or office to protect each right. True or false? This one should be easy.
False.
False.
Yeah, false.
False. Okay. Yeah, and just for context, part of what got me thinking about this one was just I'm kind of concerned about the whole faith office thing. I recognize that there has been kind of a little chaplain and office of religious matters and stuff before created under previous presidencies, but I'm just kind of like, that kind of stoked that anew in my mind. And I'm just like, I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to that. Like, the proper venue for that is if there's a dispute, if there's somebody whose religious rights are not being respected, the proper venue for addressing that question is the courts. You go and say, hey, I was treated unfairly. This guy broke the law. This guy didn't uphold his oath of office or of citizenship or whatever. And you go sue them. You go pursue a criminal case or whatever. And then you get the matter resolved that way. Or if there's a law that does violate the First Amendment, you go and you actively challenge it. You can write your senators or whatever, write your congressmen, or you could just proactively challenge it because somebody's rights are being infringed, right? That's my opinion. And when you create these offices and bureaucracies, it just kind of, it gets in the way, because then suddenly they're like, imagine you're appointed to that position. It's like, well, what am I supposed to do? Oh, you just go make up your own rules for how this is supposed to work. We'll hand you a big rule book that's like this big. of how your office is supposed to work and everything, all the people you're supposed to employ and what they're supposed to do. And I'm just like, sounds suspicious. Honestly, like, where's the auditing process over there? Where's the oversight? Because if they can just go and make up all these rules, and then somebody does have like a complaint, oh, you're not allowed to take that to the courts. You're supposed to take that to this office over here. Get on the phone with them, ring, 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 and they just go through the whole call center loop or whatever. So it's good luck getting redress for your grievances. That's my issue there.
My favorite law in the books, as far as religious issues goes, is the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It is the most difficult standard in the law, according to the Supreme Court, for the government to meet. And I love it. I use it actively against them, and they just don't even fight me. They just shut up and go away.
We need more of that.
Oh, it's a great law. Greatest law. Fantastic. Not only do they have to prove that they have a right to infringe on your religious rights, they have to do it in the least restrictive manner possible. Fantastic law for us.
All right. Sounds good. We have any other thoughts on this? Need more expounding?
No.
Hear you thinking there. We can hear you humming.
I think I heard a no. Okay. Well, and yeah, like just I call foul on the First Amendment when there's somebody who's like actively promoting a particular flavor of religion, like Trump's appointee does, Clara White Kane, I think it is. Maybe I'm misremembering your first name, but like, anyways, kind of weird name. Sorry, but maybe I'm just being prejudicial on that. But my real issue there is just why are taxpayer funds going towards propping up, giving somebody a megaphone, and I don't know what's even the purpose of the office. It's one of those things.
The Department of Education is a religion and has been propped up by the government, so it might be a backlash to them. The church is called socialism, the counterfeit religion of Satan, and they've been
the religion of Satan.
1913. So we've already got an established religion in the United States, and it's the secular religion of socialism.
Yes, that is factual, and the prophets have called out people like John Dewey, Marxists, all these Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud. I'm wanting to do a video, by the way, on the statements the prophets have made on the subject of public education. They were very much in favor of providing education as a private religious institution, which they do through like Brigham Young University and Institute and stuff like that. But they wanted to provide comprehensive education, and they did for a while. But then, like their tone about education, like their gung-ho-ness on that subject, drastically shifted the moment the government came in and was like, "Let's come and have taxpayer-funded education." And I was like, "No, bad idea."
It wasn't the moment that it happened. First, it came in. The Protestants came in and were offering free education, and the members went over to the Protestant schools because the LDS schools were still charging. And then the government came in and the people said, "Oh, free schools." And the prophet said, "Do not go there. It's going to destroy you." And they went anyway, and the church schools folded because the members refused to do what the prophets were telling them. And so it basically works out to the same thing that happened when Saul was called as king. The prophet and God said, "Don't go and have a king." And the members said, "Oh yeah," the people of Israel said, "Oh yeah, we want a king." And God said, "I give up. Have a king. Here, I'll give you this crappy guy. See how you like it." And that's what happens. And that's what happened with socialism, with schools, with Social Security. President Grant said that Social Security was against the teachings of Jesus Christ. And
That's
the people who embraced it the most were the people of Utah. So when you walk away, God goes, "Okay, if you're not going to do what I tell you to do, I'll give you what you want." And
We're seeing that played out. Yeah, I want to have a museum. I want to have a last days museum. If we turn into a nuclear wasteland, which is not the least probable thing ever, I want to have like a museum that's just like, I'm going to show you all of the things the prophets told us not to do, and what we did, and what happened. Just boom, 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 boom. Just go through the history. It's night and day. If you want to understand, this is the way to teach your kids history, by the way. World history, United States history. If the prophets have commented on something, I went back and looked at what they had to say about World War II when that was starting up. They said this does not have to become a global conflict. We do not have to get involved, and so on. Like, it's really interesting. You look at their commentary on these things, and you're like, oh, that's what caused the Great Depression. Oh, it's amazing. I want to do a whole series on that. It's gonna be great.
The prophet said, don't buy war bonds. And then the people said, we want to buy war bonds. And the prophet said, go ahead and buy war bonds.
See what happens.
Do. Yeah.
Don't touch the stove. Don't touch it. Don't. Yeah.
And let's face it, the laws of Moses are you do not use the bathroom upstream. That was what the original laws of Moses really are all about. But don't do this, don't touch that. Hey, you got to keep clean or you're going to die because the natural laws are going to kill you. So most of the laws the church gives us are pretty much, if you do that, you're going to be miserable. Okay, be miserable.
Yep. Our Heavenly Father is a very good parent. He's the best. All right, here we go. Great parents here. So let's see. Should we go on to the next question?
Sure.
We've torn this one to shreds. All right. Plea bargaining is unconstitutional. Yay or nay?
People have the right to contract, so they have the right to do it. But the way that it's used is a disgusting violation of the court process. It's beyond horrible. So I would say that you have the right to it, but the way that it's used and the prosecutorial misconduct that is used around plea bargaining, that is unconstitutional. But an actual plea bargain, you have the right to contract. You have the right to be a voluntary slave. You have that right. You don't have the right to enslave someone, but you do have the right to be a voluntary slave.
Okay, Amy, do you want to go next?
I
Maybe we'll go to Drew and then revisit Amy. Your microphone's muted if you didn't need to do that.
Oh, okay.
Okay, there we go. Okay, we got you back. Okay. Just wondered if you didn't want to speak up yet. You can go ahead.
Plea bargaining is not a good thing ever. I think often lawyers want to pigeonhole people in that direction and to make money for themselves, I guess. But
The question is it unconstitutional?
right, I don't think it is unconstitutional.
Just misused.
Right.
Okay, Drew, what do you think?
Well, I think it's unconstitutional. You have a right to a trial, and so I think I think you're always meant to have a trial of your peers. Plea bargaining takes that away.
Do you have the right to plead guilty?
If you want to. Sorry, I'm stealing.
Yeah,
Are you
I
asking?
guess you do, and then you don't get a trial, do you? If you plead.
No, so you do have the right to not accept a jury trial.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and disagree with all of you on that, because so this is Article 3, Clause 2. Sorry, Article 3, Section 3. Sorry, let me back up. Article 3, Section 2, Clause 3. The United States Constitution says, "The trial of all crimes, except in cases of impeachment, shall be by jury," and that's a shall. I mean, the Sixth Amendment talks about that you shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial, but the text of the Constitution proper says that the trial of all crimes shall be by jury, and the only exception is if it's an impeachment proceeding.
So you wouldn't even plead guilty?
So
If you plead guilty, then there is no trial. So that doesn't apply. It only applies if there's a trial.
no, you still have to have a trial.
You don't have to have a trial if you plead guilty.
I would contend otherwise. I would contend that you even if you plead guilty, let's say that somebody's, maybe this is a crazy example, right? But let's say that somebody feels pressure. Somebody does feel, oh, I there's a plea deal, right? That's part of what puts pressure to plea deal is because if they think that there's an easier way out than having a trial, right? But you have to have a trial in order to establish that it is real. You could have people who are being coerced by visible or not so visible actors to plead guilty. Maybe they're not guilty. Maybe they're insane. Who knows, right? You'd want to have a due process for examining that.
Are you saying that the judge shouldn't even ask the question? Shouldn't even ask you how you plead?
Here's what I would say
Trial.
about plea deals. Plea bargains are unconstitutional. They're patently unconstitutional because the Constitution does require that the trial of all crimes shall be by jury. But it also, the Fifth and the Eighth Amendments, no person shall be compelled to be a witness against himself. And also the Eighth Amendment, nor cruel and unusual, excessive bail, cruel and unusual punishment shall not be imposed. And what plea bargaining is, by definition, by its very nature, is here the statute says this. And we know, the legislature knows that that is a cruel and unusual punishment. They know it's excessive. But since we, the prosecution and the judge are so kind and beneficent, we're offering you a chance to get off easy without us really having to do any work or actually establish your guilt. And we're just going to, give you an easy way out, but you don't get to claim your rights. You waive your rights. And I would submit that the plain wording of the Constitution says you can't even waive your rights. You can fail to claim them through ignorance, right? But you can't actively, I don't know, you don't have that, they can't produce a two-track system at least. So answering directly the question, is plea bargaining constitutional or not? It's definitely unconstitutional because they have this two-track justice system. They're trying to strong-arm you into waiving your rights. And can you just do that? I would say, no, you've got to have a proper trial.
Usual at 1790.
What was usual? Jury trial every time.
What was cruel and unusual punishment?
Oh, what was cruel and unusual punishment versus?
In 1790, what was
cruel and unusual punishment in 1790? That's a fair question. I
don't know. I weren't there.
I don't know what their standards were exactly.
being drawn and quartered comes from our common law roots. So that was rather normal, being drawn and quartered. So would that be cruel and unusual today? And if it is, why would we not go back to
Probably the most cruel and unusual.
Well, I don't think we have to inherit everything that jolly old England was in the habit of doing in that era. There were quite a number of practices that the colonists objected to, and I think a few too many things came along for the ride. There were too many. We see this with our judicial theory and so on, that there were some stowaways, basically some remnants of the Tory movement, if you will.
If we don't interpret the Constitution the way that it was meant, and by the definition of the words that were used by the men that wrote it, we don't have a Constitution. We have what Senator Sam Ervin said, that judicial verbicide is turning the Constitution into a worthless scrap of paper. The word welfare certainly didn't mean poor relief.
Nope.
That didn't come about until the early 1900s. So we have to interpret it by the time that the Constitution was there. And there were many crimes that were in the United States that were not given a jury trial. That actually went to a case in Nevada, down in a drunk driving case from Nevada. And they said, no, the current misdemeanor trials, the state doesn't have to give you that because it's actually not what was considered to be a crime. Was a I can't remember the word, but it's below a misdemeanor, and those were not given. I think that was up to a year in jail without a trial back after the Constitution of the United States was written. And so You didn't get a jury trial. So all trials doesn't mean all trials. It means the trials that were recognized as being able to go to a trial back when the Constitution was written. And of course, that only applies, the Constitution on that issue only applies to the federal government, certainly doesn't apply to Utah or Nevada or Florida.
So I would beg to differ on both of those points actually, because I have yet to see evidence that jury trials were not held even for the supposedly minor cases. So infraction, for example, wasn't a designation that they had back then, and there was a very recent Utah Supreme Court case that they did a study, very thorough, going back through all these newspaper clippings and everything to see if they could figure out what the landscape of jury trial was in the early days of the state of Utah, immediately after statehood. So we're going back to like 1898. And they found like there was not a single case that was not tried by a jury. And so there was somebody who was, yeah, Utah was, the Utahns were very much in favor of jury trial, notwithstanding their treatment in that respect. Yeah, so even if you were fined for $1, you'd get a jury. So yeah, I would love to see more research on that, but like, yeah, I have yet to see. So the Magna Carta actually is another data point here, where the nobles wrote this in to say that the king is not allowed to subject even the common people to amercements, which were just fines or fees, without the consent of the persons of his neighborhood, the honorable persons of his neighborhood. In other words, you need to have a jury consent, even if your government is only giving you a little pinprick of a fine. I thought that was very fascinating. So that's the common law. That's the true common law that we inherited from England.
Well, the Supreme Court on that issue came out of the state of Nevada, so I was very interested in it. They did research on it and published it inside the case. So if you want to study up on that one, and that would be 100 years, Utah's jury trials were 100 years afterwards. And Michigan, they give jury trials for such things. Do you get a jury trial for a parking ticket? That's a good question, because a parking ticket in Nevada is a civil issue, and the Constitution of Nevada says that you get a jury trial for all civil cases. So that's a little bit different. And some states have traffic crimes as not crimes, but as civil infractions. And so once again, that's going to be determined individually by each and every state, and definitely not by the United States Constitution.
Well, I would submit, that the federal, a right that is guaranteed at the federal level, there have been rulings, I'm not remembering the court, United States versus Aaron or something, Cooper v. Aaron, I think maybe, they did say that if there is a right that's secured at the federal level, the states cannot deny it, and that would include jury trial. But yeah, it's fascinating, because actually one of my things that I've been doing professionally is handwriting recognition using machine learning and stuff, and we've been like woefully under curious about the conditions of things at the time of the founding of our nation, and sometimes those are kind of relevant questions. So going through and just transcribing all of those, ancient records, so to speak, could actually help us out with some of these questions, and I'm excited for that. I'm going to go ahead and go to the.
There's a whole list of the amendments to the Constitution, as far as the Declaration. I mean the Bill of Rights, that were slowly applied by the Supreme Court, not by Congress, not by the states. It was strictly by the Supreme Court that applied, like, for instance, the First Amendment to the states, which I always laughed at because it was ridiculous, because it says Congress shall make no law. It doesn't say states shall make no law. So if the Supreme Court applies the First Amendment to the states, Congress isn't in control of the states. So therefore, the wording alone means that it can't be applied. And then they went through just recently, within the last 15 years, applied the Second Amendment to the states in 2 different cases. And that was just recently. The Third Amendment has never been applied to the states. The Seventh Amendment has never been applied to the states. The Eighth Amendment has. Sixth, yes. Fifth, Fourth. Of course, the Ninth and 10th aren't applied to the states because they apply to the states anyway. So, but the Supreme Court has used the 14th Amendment to apply those things. They weren't in the original. There was no application for protecting religious freedom for the states in the United States Constitution. That didn't happen.
I'm going to go ahead and just suspect something out loud here, and it may be that, like you're saying, the way the judiciary has interpreted it
Yes.
subsequently set the stage for the 14th Amendment. That is to say, the judiciary did something that wasn't quite proper, and then Congress comes in and says, oh, we have the cure to that, and it's to erase more of your rights.
That happens a lot. Yeah.
That's happening right now. That's happening right now. If you want to stick around after and discuss, there are several current events issues on that note that are very looming. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next question. All right, number 9. Rights are more likely to be preserved when governments are able to be held accountable by the people. Don't think it's controversial. Yes.
Yeah, of course.
Agreed. Yes.
Yes.
Otherwise we have a king, right?
Right.
Otherwise we're just saying, trust me, bro.
Even when you have a king, the people have the right to overthrow the king. England proved that.
Yeah, that's right. And the Magna Carta and everything. So, and the Declaration of Independence and
There you
all of the
go.
above.
There you
What's
go.
the next
right.
question?
Okay, the next question is, the two-party system is constitutional.
Hmm. It's not mentioned in the Constitution. So
No.
It's not
What do you think,
mentioned in
Christopher?
the Constitution. It's an abused system. I know that on the state level, it's very abused. The minor parties have to pay for their own primaries, whereas the Republican Party and the Democrat Party gets theirs paid for by the state, which was interesting in the presidential elections in Nevada. They had a primary for the president on the Republican side, but then the Republican Party voted to opt out of that, and all of the delegates were assigned at a private Republican convention, which they got into. So, and then Joseph Smith said that in the last days that there would be two major parties. One would be the Republican Party, one would be the Democrat Party. And of course, that was before either party actually existed. And then that the Independent American Party would come about. And then we were going to be in wars continuously, and we would spend our strength in wars. And then we were going to be invaded after that. And we'd barely hold on, and the boys from the mountains would come down and save the Constitution. So the two-party system, I think, is constitutional because it doesn't have anything that says it can't be, and that's strictly it's not a grant of power, it's a limit of power. So yes, they're constitutional, although the system, as with everything, is an abused system.
So my take on it is that the two-party system is patently unconstitutional because when we refer to the system, we're talking about Republican, Democrat, or whatever. It's unconstitutional. And generally party systems are unconstitutional the minute they are granted like a nanogram of governmental power. So this is something that I've been able to go through in detail in the petition that Phil Lyman, the Utah Republican Party's nominee for the governor race this last year, he submitted a petition to the United States Supreme Court against the signature gathering bill of Utah, which basically it forced a direct Democratic primary between him and the incumbent Spencer Cox. And Spencer Cox ended up going onto the general election ballot, and Phil Lyman wasn't even on there, even though he was the Republican nominee. So he's like, wait, what gives? I was the Republican nominee. How did I get bumped off the ballot? That does not make sense. And so, the issue, if you read that brief, I did a deep dive on it, but the big poison pill there is the fact that parties are granted a differential route to the ballot at all. And if you look at that, it's actually criminal electioneering by definition. What the parties are doing with the government, there's party and government incest going on, where the government grants the party some political power, saying you get to appear on the ballot through this special, primary route or whatever. And those peasants out there, they have to go through it a different way. And maybe the mainstream party candidates get a little endorsement next to their name. And a lot of voters, when they go to the general election, they just look for the party endorsement. Okay, who's the Republican? Oh, it's Spencer Cox. Okay, I vote for him, right? He's got an R next to his name. The prophets have warned us against that. So more intelligent voting would help rescue us from this problem. but it's the very fact that the government itself is actually advertising the candidates in the polling place because they belong to one of the mainstream parties. That's criminal electioneering by definition. And so that's one of my issues that I have with the party system. Another goes back to the 12th Amendment in 1804, because originally the Electoral College has become massively corrupted. It's been blue shifted majorly over time because I'll just say this about it with respect to the party system. If you have, are you familiar with like plurality and first past the post voting? Anybody?
Some of it I am.
Okay, so plurality is where it's / first past the post. You can only vote for one candidate. And Veritasium on his YouTube channel, it's a very popular YouTuber, he did a video on ranked versus rated voting methods. The video title is, I think, Why Democracy is Impossible or something like that, which is a little bit of a misleading title, but it goes over why our kind of vanilla, when we think of voting, we usually think that there's only one way to vote. But there's another voting method called approval, and approval versus plurality, I would contrast them as basically plurality is like a radio button. You can only push one, and all the others you can't push. And approval, on the other hand, is like check boxes. You can check the box next to each candidate that you want. And the real virtue of that, the original Constitution allowed the electors to vote for two candidates. And the one with the most votes would be president, one with the second most votes would be vice president. And what that does is third parties are actually viable under that system. But if you take that away, like the 12th Amendment did, and boil it down to just first past the post, that's what gave us the two-party system.
If the 12th Amendment was passed, then it's constitutional.
I would argue no, because it contradicts other. It's not the
Matter it contradicts. It was passed. It supersedes everything else.
I would say still no, but by virtue of the argument that they're still divvying up political power amongst these parties, right? That the people, we did not elect these parties, right? It has to be acknowledged they're basically part of the government, because third parties become disenfranchised. This is one of the reasons why third parties, for the most part, just don't participate in our politics. Anyways, I could go on that one, but that's been a big issue for me. And I'm just like, and the national parties, they extorted the people of the territory of Utah into joining them, disbanding their People's Party and so on as a prerequisite to joining the nation.
Just as a question, does the state of Utah have its own laws on political parties, or as political party laws controlled by the federal government in Utah? Because in Nevada has its own laws on political parties. It's not set up by the United States Constitution. It's strictly set up by the laws in the Constitution of the state of Nevada.
Well, in the state of Utah, Utah does have laws regulating the parties. They have multiple different tracks for parties. There's like a qualified political party and registered political party. They have different rules for them. Again, different ways of accessing the ballot. But basically, the issue is the same, that they're giving government power to these parties, and that makes the parties basically part of the government.
They could be, so that Utah could be like Nebraska, and they don't have I think it's Nebraska that doesn't have a state legislature that has Republicans or Democrats in it.
Yeah, it's an interesting.
Not really. Yeah. Party. See, so that's why it's not unconstitutional, and it's not constitutional because it doesn't apply. The federal government doesn't apply. Each state makes their own rules on who can be on the ballot, and who can't.
Yeah, I think with the part of the reason maybe this was done at the level of the presidential elections is because those are the elections that most people pay attention to. And the national parties are an issue. They do affect and they infect the local and state elections and policies and so on. So I take issue with the very existence of national parties that are actually, if you will, subsidized by the federal government. They're given a platform by them. That's part of my issue. So if we get to the core of that, I would say, no, there's not a constitutional power to do that. Say, no, that's just taking away the representative power of the people.
Paying for them is a different issue than whether or not it's unconstitutional, because the payment could be unconstitutional. I'll agree with you there. But the creation of them individually, that's our right to freely associate. You would be taking away my right to associate with a Democrat, a Republican, a Libertarian, a Green Party member, an Independent American Party member, if you say that it's illegal for me to associate now you violated the right of my freedom of assembly.
So, and I'll postpone most of this discussion for later again if you have interest in that. But associational rights were the main thing that were argued in Phil Lyman's brief. It was prepared by Tracy Halverson. And I think that associational rights would do just fine as long as the parties weren't actually granted a role in the elections themselves. That is, if the donkey or the elephant didn't actually weigh more on the scale of the elections than just the collective voice of the people, if that were not the case, then we could argue associational rights and be just fine, right? But the issue is that it's actually a matter of representational rights. Our representational rights are being harmed by the fact that the government gives these parties a role in the election process.
And so it's against those people.
What was that?
Can the individual vote against either one of those parties?
They can, but again, there's an issue. So part of it does come down to that electioneering issue. It's basically that the government is in fact subsidizing, propping up, trying to make popular, trying to promote these mainstream parties. Yeah. And our taxpayer dollars are actually going towards that subsidy. Our taxpayer dollars are factually making our ballots look different, which does influence the way people vote. Yeah. And so, by definition, criminal electioneering. I want to do a whole separate episode on that, but it's like Animal Farm, like all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. So that's kind of my big grousing with the party system. Founding fathers acknowledged parties are likely to exist anyway. They just shouldn't have political power above and beyond the people.
I have a comment.
Go ahead, Amy.
When I don't know if you've read the farewell address of George Washington lately. It's a really good read once in a while. When President George Washington left office, he cautioned the nation not to divide themselves into political parties.
Yes, he warned us in the strongest terms.
He also warned us not to get rid of the religious oaths, and we've done that too. Yeah, he gave us good warnings and we didn't follow them.
I would love it if we could take all of this and just distill it down to here's a recipe for restoring the Republican government. Here you go. Here's everything that we did wrong. Here are all of our mistakes. Here's all the data. Here's how to do it right.
Yeah.
It's kind of our objective here.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Amy. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say that I remember in the early 90s when they started to remove all the 10 Commandment. There was one in every state, the 10 Commandment stones. There were, anyways. I think that was a poor move.
Tragic.
A good friend of mine was the judge from Alabama that ended up being removed from the Alabama Supreme Court, and they called him the 10 Commandment judge, and I'm going blank on his name right now. So yeah, that was a big issue back then. You're right, Amy.
Well, I think we have a new participant here, Trevor Larson.
Hello, everyone. Well, excuse
Welcome.
me. Sorry, I said, what's up, everyone?
Hey,
Trevor.
Doing great.
next question.
There you go. Welcome. Do you want to give yourself a quick introduction and we'll go on to the next question? Because I think we might be pushing some people's bedtimes here.
Yeah. Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I don't know if I'm as well versed on all this constitutional stuff as you guys are, but I'm here to learn. But yeah, my name's Trevor. I'm here. I live in Gilbert, Arizona here. Lived here pretty much my whole life, and got a wife, 2 kids, and yeah, that's hoping that we can take our country back. So this is a good conversation that needs to be had more. So happy to be here.
Sounds
Welcome.
good. Yeah, welcome. Thanks for being here, Trevor. Thanks for taking the time. Let's get our country back. Maybe the country's here, but our rights might be hurting sometimes. All right, so question 11. There were a total of 12 that I sent out. People in family court and divorce courts should have a right to a jury. And just for context, the status quo in the United States is family court, divorce court. You're just categorically not allowed to have a jury. And the argument there is that, well, it's kind of, private, sensitive family matters or whatever, requires expertise or whatever, right? So let's just each give a quick yay or nay on this and we'll discuss.
The question is not whether or not you have a right to jury trial. It's whether or not you've surrendered your right to a jury trial because you've moved yourself from a common law marriage into a marriage with a license, which creates a system where the state has established a secular religion in which it is now a part of your marriage. And so when you do that, you've moved yourself, if it would be on a federal level, which would be easier to understand, you've moved yourself from an Article 3 court into an Article 1 court in which the state gets to, they did get to assign burdens of proof, create assumptions, define rights, prescribe remedies, and force the beneficiary to provide the person seeking to vindicate that right to go before a particularized tribunal created to perform the specialized adjudicated tasks related to that right. In the state of Nevada, we started getting licenses to marry, where we then, after that, slowly, we lost the right to a jury trial in Nevada, which we always had for divorces before. But the reason why was specifically on that issue. I was reading there from a Supreme Court case, by the way. It was Northern Pipeline Construction Company versus Marathon Pipeline. And now this is a very big issue because of income tax, because tax court is an Article 1 court. And so in order to have to be able to go to an Article 1 court and not violate the powers of Article 3 courts, you have to have received a benefit from the federal government. Now, I don't know how many of you work for the federal government, because then you would have received a benefit from them. But if you work at your own little construction company, you certainly haven't received a benefit from the government, and therefore you can't be forced to go into an Article 1 court. And the family courts have become Article 1 courts. And yeah, this is a huge issue when we fought it here somewhat in Nevada. And they lose their minds whenever I bring up those kind of issues. But because of the income tax issue, and because I haven't filed in 46 years, this is very prominent in the tax truth movement. And that's the problem with family courts and why you don't get the right to a jury. And that happened back in the 40s, right during World War II. They moved that in there. That's the same time that the IRS removed the religious oath from the 1040 form and changed it to a declaration that removed to where you don't have to say, in the name of God, I say this. Because when you did that in an oath, you call God as a witness. But when you make a declaration, you don't call God as a witness. So at the same time they did.
Go
ahead, Amy.
Oh, you can hear me?
We heard you squeaking.
I was letting my dogs out.
Oh, okay. So that's what's happened. And that's what happened why we lost the right to the jury trial, is because we got the state governments involved in the religion of marriage. I mean, even our temple presidents have to get a license. Patrick Henry would have gone to the headsman before he would have allowed the government to give him a license to marry somebody. So that's the problem. That's why we lost it. And no, we don't have a right to a jury trial because we voluntarily gave it up when we got a license from the government with permission to freely associate with a lady and have children.
So that's an interesting take, and I'm just going to say that sounds very suspiciously to me like it's building off of the base plate there. Those Legos don't really seem to connect. So Article 1, Section 8, Clause 9 says that, let's see, the Congress shall have power to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. What I understand that to mean, by the way, is that they are authorized to, to create such tribunals, not to execute, not to carry out such courts, not to be such courts, as it were. They can establish that there's a need for another judicial structure over this, region or territory or whatever, but not that they can have this, sidecar judicial structure that they oversee and carry out and so on. That would seem to violate the separation of powers.
Well, the Supreme Court said it doesn't violate the suppression of powers, but when they gave us back the Seventh Amendment after they overturned the Chevron decision, and they gave us back to where we had jury trials there, they absolutely have the right. That's what tax court is. That's what OSHA courts are. That's what BLM courts are. For
According to the Supreme Court.
Decision, well, that's one of the branches of government, and Congress has done nothing to stop it. And
I wonder why.
The executive branch hasn't done anything to stop it. And the people have certainly voted for the people that didn't try to stop it. So if we have a democracy, which we don't, we have a republic, but we have a democracy somewhat in the States, the people have the right to say no, but the people have accepted voluntary slavery, which Thomas Jefferson said was the worst form of slavery that there is, but they've accepted it. When you go get my son and my daughter-in-law, they got married in Colorado, because in Colorado, you can get married under common law. All you got to do is file your contract and say, in fact, you don't even have to file a contract. You just do that if you want to record it. And the IRS will actually recognize a common law marriage if you want to be a taxpayer. They recognize that from Colorado. Utah also has a form of common law marriage. So you can stand away from family court if you do it right. You could put it in your contract that this doesn't go to family court, and in order to have a divorce, I have to have a jury trial. But you have to learn how to protect yourself. And if you don't protect yourself, you become a voluntary slave.
That's interesting. So would you, could it be argued, therefore, since we're talking contract law here, that we'll get to everyone else here because we've gone on this for a little bit. Could it be argued then that, even if you get a marriage license, that it is also a common law marriage?
No. You have to understand, George Washington didn't get a license to get married. Neither did Abraham Lincoln. Neither did John Taylor. Neither did Brigham Young. Neither did Joseph Smith. Neither did anybody until they started doing that. The only state in 1856 that had marriage license requirements which weren't enforceable was Louisiana, because Louisiana was based on French law and not on English common law. So those did not exist. There's a movement within the Baptist religion to not get marriage licenses because it makes your marriage a menage a trois. So and the government has too much authority within that marriage, and also that's the reason why they can come in to a family and take your children, because in the marriage license, in doing so, you have agreed that the children are property of the government, and that they can take them. If you don't put them in school, they can take them. If you don't give them vaccinations, they can take them. So you lose your children, you lose your right to have just two people in your marriage if you get a marriage license. And it gets uglier and uglier the more you investigate that.
Yeah, well, I would just call that Supreme Court ruling bogus, honestly, because that's not what the plain meaning of words is. If you go back to that originalist era, but also it seems that the rationale is that if they can tax it, then they can adjudicate it in the manner they see fit, and they can also define it, as we know Congress has already tried in the past to redefine marriage, as has the Supreme Court. Let's go ahead and get to a couple other questions here, though. I think we'll have a lot more fun conversation on this later on. But Drew, let's go to you and see what your thoughts are on this.
Well, let me go back to the question.
Yeah, so people in family court and divorce courts should have a right to a jury.
Well, I think they should have a right to a jury, but I find the discussion very interesting that, that you do have to have a license, and you give up your right to a jury there. So I think Chris convinced me.
this is part of the reason why I want to have the format of just splat our decisions up simultaneously, and then raise hands to explain, and that way it's a little bit more interesting when we get to the after and say, okay, did anything change your mind? Did any of the discussion move you one way or the other? Right?
Yeah, my mind's been changed.
It's interesting to measure things like that. Okay, let's go to Trevor. Welcome, Trevor. By the way,
To be honest, I don't really have an opinion. You guys are way smarter than me on this. People in family court should have right to a jury. I mean, my immediate gut reaction said yes. I don't see why they shouldn't. But again, I'm very illiterate when it comes to this stuff. So I'm going to defer this to you guys.
What? Can you hear me?
Hey, Gabriel, by the way, welcome. We haven't done an introduction for you yet. Just welcome.
No, I just got
want to
back
give an
from
intro,
hockey,
you can.
so I'm just got on. Yeah, my question is, in regards to the jury, is it not required to have all members of the jury agree on a decision for it to go one way or another?
Okay, that's a separate question. I think defining what the jury is. There were some really interesting debates in the Constitutional Convention for the state of Utah when they were applying for statehood on the question of how much unanimity do they require. The different states actually kind of diverged a little bit there. They changed the unanimity requirements. Obviously, if you have a higher requirement for unanimity, then in a criminal case at least, then it's more lenient towards the defendant, right? The evidentiary standard is higher to convict.
Are there any states that have it that you don't have to have a unanimous decision on a jury trial?
Yes. They have different rules for civil jury trials and
Very
for
different.
criminal. Yeah. So
I know that in Europe, that's particularly Germany, it is a majority and not unanimous. So I think it's like half plus one. But like in places like Australia and Canada, it's always just before a judge, and that judge then decides on the court case. And I see failures in both. Because if you have a jury, it's easy. Well, according to TV, it's easy to manipulate a jury and yada yada. But then if you're just before a single judge, then you're at the whim of an individual and whatever ideologies that they decide to impose. And so I don't see a win-win in this, particularly in the case of fathers who are usually disadvantaged when they go before the courts.
Okay. All right. So you think they should have a jury? Is that your position?
I would probably go with like a 3-judge panel.
Hey,
Okay,
can we hear about Gabriel? He says he's from Germany. I'd love the introduction to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, brief introduction. Converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints when I was 19, following a variety of religious investigations. Originally from Canada, currently living in Australia. Travel between the two, and of a European background, Italian background.
All right, cool.
I couldn't tell with that vowel at the end of your name that you were Italian.
Yeah, I like to tell people that it's Welsh and it's actually pronounced Smith.
That's great.
That's pretty good. Yeah. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, glad to have you on here. Do you want to explain just briefly on the 3-judge panel? What your rationale for that is?
I guess, like, and again, a lot of the stuff that I know is more towards a Commonwealth system, and that is like for paroles or anything like that. Individuals go before a panel of judges, and they then decide whether a person can be released or not, or whether a person is convicted or not. And so you have 3 judges that rule on a situation. And I guess it's a bit like in boxing, where you can have a split decision, but you have a decision one way or another as to whether the person would be innocent or guilty. If you have one individual, they say that if you get there before lunch as opposed to after lunch, you have a better chance of being acquitted after lunch rather than before lunch. There's all these little factors that play into account. But if you get a panel of 3 judges, and they're selected by, I guess, the lawyers, then hopefully you have a better ruling than relying on, a female judge, for instance. And I'm obviously projecting here, or a jury. But most of my experience with the American justice system has been what I see on TV. So I'm sure it's like 2% accurate.
Same is true of us, by the way. I think for the most part, most of our experience comes from what we see on TV because we just don't do jury trials anymore, except for super high-profile cases.
Mm.
Amy,
I've been involved in several jury trials. I like them a lot.
Okay.
I like them too.
United States, as a matter of fact.
Good. All right. So, Amy, what are your thoughts on this? People in family court and divorce court should have the right to a jury.
I think they should have a right if they choose to, but can they opt out? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, we can hear you. Do you have more to say on that?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and give my thoughts on it. I believe absolutely they should, because I emphatically reject the judicial interpretation that Article 1 courts are meaningfully different from Article 3, as in there's really no such thing as an Article 1 court. It's simply stating that the legislature has power to figure out what the appropriate scope and size of a given geographic region of jurisdiction is, and so on, and what that hierarchy looks like of the judiciary. But the judicial power, it's all the judicial power belongs to the judicial branch, right? And so that means you don't have legislative appointees or panels, as it were, making these decisions. That clearly transgresses the separation of powers. And I would say just categorically, yeah, of course they have a right to a jury trial, because you look at the Bill of Rights. You look at I'm trying to remember the number of my brain's kind of Seventh Amendment. That's what I thought it was. The Seventh Amendment. Where suits at common law. You have the right to a jury if the value in controversy is more than $20. If it's a criminal case, you get a jury no matter what. And family relationships are clearly vastly worth more than $20. So of course you should never ever make a decision to separate a family or make a custody assignment or issue a restraining order or anything like that without a jury hearing the case and determining how that should be done.
What about a military court? A military court isn't an Article 3 court. Do you believe there shouldn't be any military courts?
That's an exigency that's explicitly provided for in the Constitution. So that's not something that I would.
Military court is specifically called for in the Constitution of the United States.
I also think that's outside the question of what's being asked here.
No,
Yeah.
he's saying that an Article 1 court and an Article 3 court, an Article 1 court is not allowed. But if it's allowed for the military, then if you want to join something with the government, like, for example, you want to get a social security number, and the court and the IRS, which is the governing body over that, says that you can't have a social security number, you have to adjudicate that in an Article 1 court because you are asking for a privilege from the government, which is what the United States Supreme Court said is the reason for Article 1 courts, is when you ask for a benefit from the government. And that's the only way that you're forced into an Article 1 court.
Well, I would submit that I don't see any enumerated power in the Constitution that grants that to the government, the right for them to grant that to the people. Basically, there's nothing in there that says government has the right to create these whatever numbers and sell them to people and subjugate people in their rights as a consequence of that. So military tribunals, yes, those are an exigency. That there is a specific. I'm trying to remember. Here you go. No person shall be held to answer for capital or otherwise infamous crime. This is the Fifth Amendment, unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger. So, if you are in the land or naval forces and they have to
during
form one of these, then
if it's not during wartime.
I'm not seeing any provision for that. So no, I would just question that jurisdictional. I would question the existence of that jurisdiction altogether if somebody's trying to claim that. Besides which, the Constitution doesn't make provision for a standing army. You know, the only case in which the legislature could act functionally as though it were a jury is in the case of impeachment, where the House of Representatives basically performs the role of a grand jury to form the impeachment, which is analogous to a grand jury indictment or presentment, and then the Senate is analogous to the trial jury, the petite jury, which actually tries the case. That's the way I see that. Let's go ahead and go on to the next question then, unless there are other thoughts on this one. Okay. But yeah, I was just going to say one other thing about the 3 judges thing. I think it's really important that it be a jury of their peers for the simple reason that these are people who are not like employees of the government. They don't have, they have skin in the game, as it were, because they want to rule justly, because if they were tried in a similar manner, or if there was a civil suit, they would want people to decide similarly to, they would want to decide it favorably and fairly towards the people involved, right? That's my rationale for that as well. All right, let's go ahead and go to number 12. Inflation is theft. Inflation violates property rights. True or false? Should go around. Let's start with Amy this time, because I've been usually going in the order of the screen, and like Amy's been at the bottom. So let's start at the bottom and go to the top this time.
Inflation.
Oh. Inflation violates property rights. No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think your question was on the screen.
Oh, is it not on the screen?
No, our
Oh,
picture.
I did. Our pictures are all on the screen. Oh, lovely. Okay. I think I accidentally ended the screen share. Give me a second. Yeah, that'll do it.
The question is inflation violates property rights.
So true or false?
Natural inflation or artificially created inflation, or do you own a balloon manufacturing company?
The government is printing money or just dumping currency supply in somewhere that does not have intrinsic value.
Well, they're not printing money, they're printing notes, which is a promise to pay.
That's correct. It's an IOU. But anyways,
Yeah.
is this theft? Let's just get a yay or a nay for everybody, and then we'll go around and discuss. So let's start with Amy. Amy, what do you think?
Yay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought nay at first because I've seen too many elderly getting taxed out of their homes. So
Well, that'd be that it is.
Okay.
Well, yeah. So let's go ahead and go around the room, and then we'll discuss some more. Okay. Let's go to Gabriel next, and then Drew, and then Trevor, and then.
I would say nay. I don't think that those two are actually closely related. But if a yea or nay, I'm going to say nay, and then we can discuss after.
Okay, so it doesn't violate property rights. What do you think, Drew?
Yay.
Okay, Trevor.
Nay.
Okay, I'm going to say yay. It definitely does. Christopher.
Inflation created by the Federal Reserve System and the World Bank absolutely is a violation of property rights, because it takes away our right to property without due process. So yeah, it does. But then, that the whole system, the United States has stopped being a republic in 1913. So the whole thing is set up to steal our property rights and our religious rights, etc.
Like the CFPB.
I didn't get to hear you what you said.
I said like the CFPB.
I don't know what that is.
Consumer Finance Protection Bureau.
All of the federal organizations are set up to steal our rights, not protect them.
Yeah, it's so like they can bypass congressional approval for spending and stuff and just go um straight to the Federal Reserve. That's basically what the CFPB allows.
Yeah. That's changed somewhat since the ruling in SEC versus Jarkeski, which was the one that gave us back the rights to a Seventh Amendment jury trial.
Hmm.
That was in 2024, by the way.
Well, I'm finding inflation extremely problematic. I've found there's a great video out there by Learn Liberty, and he says it this way. He says inflation is a tax on savings,
True.
and that's the case because they're increasing the money supply, and they get to decide where to allocate it. By the way,
Well, it's a tax on savings and a tax on spending.
it's a tax on any money that exists anywhere. You know, if it's at the moment of being transacted, it's still losing its value as it's.
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of imagine it like you have this gold coin and you're handing it to someone else, and like the universe just comes and like this ray of beast, this burst of gamma rays comes and just knocks off a whole bunch of gold atoms from your coin while you're transacting it, and as you put it in storage, it's just constantly losing mass and getting stripped away. But money is intended to be a token of service. This is the proof that you have provided a service to your fellow man at this amount, and therefore you are entitled to, it's a trust that you are entitled to this amount of service from your fellow man. And so in that sense, it is kind of already a promise. But at the same time, yeah, people can like steal money. They can, they could inflate it away. But like one of my issues with not only the Federal Reserve, but any form of inflationary fiat is that the existence of some untold sum of trillions of dollars just sitting somewhere that hasn't moved yet and hasn't even seen the light of day, that's unfalsifiable. I hope you sleep well tonight. The existence of like this just vast sum of alleged money that just makes all of your savings worthless, no one can disprove it.
I think I read that question a different way, because I read it as property rights, as in land rights, as in if I own a piece of land or property, then that's mine, and inflation really doesn't affect it. A perfect example of this, I think it was the Great Depression in Germany. A person grabs a wheelbarrow full of Deutschmarks to go buy bread. And then as he goes in and comes out, he finds that all the Deutschmarks has been spilt on the floor and the wheelbarrow stolen.
Yeah.
and that wheelbarrow is their property. And so having that, its value isn't affected by inflation. My land is not affected by inflation. And therefore, there is no real theft unless someone actually comes and steals it. Having said that, though, income or anything that is placed within the banking system, that would be inflation does affect, and that would be, I guess, theft from the government if they're just printing bills to curb whatever, as opposed.
There would be some effect on property that you own if you have a property tax that is based on the value of the property, because the value of the property would go up, so the tax would increase, and it would only go up basically because of inflation created by fiat money. That would be a very minor way.
Yeah.
Protected with the property route, just exactly what you were saying.
Well, I would define property, the way it is in the United States Constitution and so on, and the Latin root of that is propria, which means one's own. What is one's own, right? And so anything that belongs to you, and that would include all of the tokens of service, all of the monetary units that you have in your possession. Those are included in your property. And basically, if they're trying to, if they do anything that has the effect of devaluing that, and it's intentional, they're.
Well, then you got to argue then the income tax is a violation of property rights, which you can make that argument, but to stay consistent when you have to say the same thing.
Why is that? Explain.
Well, because if a tax on income, right? It's, my money, my property, right? So, if you're following the taxation as theft model, which I'm not totally opposed to, and your money is your property, then that's a violation of property rights, is it not?
I wouldn't necessarily make that argument with respect to income taxes or with taxes generally, because I mean, my argument isn't that taxation is theft. My argument is that theft is theft, right? And that it knowingly sapping the value of someone else's holdings and amassing them for oneself, that's unearned, and that is definitely theft. And that's what inflation does, right? But in terms of is income tax theft, um, I mean, one of my central aversions to income tax is that it guarantees you will have a big government because it enriches the government in proportion to the people, which amassing enough wealth and enough people just dying off, and then you have your property tax and your inheritance tax and everything, then the government just becomes bigger and more powerful than the people themselves and ends up just squashing them. And that was actually one of the planks of the Communist Manifesto under Karl Marx, was this progressive income tax where they could just they could bloat the government, right? Originally, there was only
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, originally under the Constitution, there were only 4 types of tax allowed. One was a direct census tax, which was basically you paid a flat fee for just being a person every year or whatever, collected by your state. And then there were 3 more. There was imposts, excises, and duties. Those were the 3 other kinds.
So can you explain how you would see the difference then between an income tax and inflation and at the end of the day, they're taking your property through the back door, through the front door, right? But
they're both taxes in a sense. Yeah.
Is it theft?
So why is one a violation of property rights and why would you say inflation is a violation of property rights, but income tax is not a violation of property rights? What's the distinction?
Well, I would say with respect to inflation, so income tax is in theory a one-time thing, right? Because they're only taxing you when you're earning something, right? And there's a little bit of I have to put a big asterisk next to that. Inflation has a similar effect basically as property rights. Basically, you're charged on a recurring basis for just owning stuff. So income tax doesn't necessarily prohibit you from owning property. It just takes a cut from all of your earnings, which obviously that's what the 16th Amendment created, was the income tax system. I don't believe it's consonant with the original intent of the Constitution, and it's.
So you're saying it's because it's existing assets that you own versus new assets that are incoming.
Right. Because one is an ongoing tax on your. Basically, they're trying to tax your right to own property. They're trying to make it more painful for you to own property. Granted, income tax also makes it more painful to be productive, right? And maybe there's no way to appease every possible angle on this, but I would say, I don't know. I think inflation is even more sinister than the income taxes, because at least the income taxes, like you're saying, are the visible tax. Inflation is the invisible tax. Inflation
is hidden.
Inflation kills those people who are sitting in hospital beds and who are shut-ins, people who are retired. It drains everybody's lifeblood away constantly and incessantly, and there's nothing we can do about it except just stop them from printing money.
Problem is, though, I mean, yes, there's a lot of government waste. That's no doubt about it. But the problem, my opinion, with inflation is that it would require, for us to make meaningful difference in inflation, it would require sacrifice by a large percentage of the population on Medicare and Social Security, right? Because those are the 2 biggest drivers of the federal budget, right? And so that would require a lot of people to be willing to surrender some of that, right, in order to bring the budget or deficit down, which therefore minimizes inflation.
Well, I disagree very strongly with Elon Musk on this point, because he claims that government spending is like what causes inflation, and that's not technically correct. It may incentivize inflation, but it's not the cause of inflation. The cause of inflation is the fact that they're printing all these IOUs. That's what causes it. It's
right, but what causes the printing? What causes the printing of all the IOUs?
is just the people who are running the printing press. It's their discretion.
Well,
That's why I say, that I'm concerned that there could be these huge pallets full of cash just sitting somewhere, and
But
none of us
what
would
I'm saying
know
is they do it in response to campaign promises, right? So the government comes in, makes promises to people that they can't keep unless the Federal Reserve prints more cash.
Yeah, but that doesn't stop them from going into debt. That doesn't stop them from raising taxes. It doesn't stop them from diverting funds to different projects. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7, I think it is, says that Congress, that's basically the power of the purse clause. Only Congress has the power to make appropriations, and they're supposed to publish a regular, basically, they're supposed to publish the receipts on everything they're spending on, and this is what Doge is supposedly investigating right now and uncovering all this stuff. That's its own separate conversation we could have, but yeah, Congress is responsible to do that. But yeah, we haven't had that transparency for a long time. It's not just been the last few administrations either. But anyway, sorry, I'm getting off track here. Let's bring this back in.
Sorry, that was partly my fault.
No, there are a lot of really cool things in relation to this that we should. This could deserve like several. This needs an entire series maybe, but I think we could. I want to try to wrap it in and get the principles succinct here. Did someone else have some comments?
I've got a couple of comments on that.
Okay, go ahead.
One, I don't think it's the government that causes inflation. I think it's the deficits that cause inflations, deficit spendings. The other thing is that I think that inflation affects younger people more than it would older people. There's kind of like a generational and almost a class divide on who it affects. Because I'll give you an example. My in-laws who bought their house for $100,000 in Australia, over the years, that's inflation has ballooned it up to $1 million. And so now if they want to, they can sell their family home for $1 million and downgrade into, a one-bedroom apartment that have benefited from that inflation, as opposed to young people trying to enter the market. Now, I'm not sure what the market's like in America, but in Australia, it's prices have doubled in the last 5 years, and it's quadrupled in the last 25 years. And so people trying to enter the market, they've got to earn more income. They've got to earn, you pretty much need double incomes to buy a home now in Australia. And so it's affecting that younger market more than it's affecting anyone else.
Yeah, and that's a great point. That's very. That's one of the pernicious things about inflation. Actually, is the older people, the older generations tend to be more conservative, but this actually is a tool. It's a weapon. The fiscal policy of the Federal Reserve or whatever institution is printing the money, basically has, if I can put it this way, the older folks in your society tend to be recruited into this pyramid scheme where they're actually invested into, they want inflation to happen. Not necessarily they want to, but they're incentivized to want inflation, which is a really, really toxic thing, right? Because you don't want to drive a generation gap. This is one of the things that does that. There are people who accuse the boomers, oh, you're just being greedy and stuff. It's like, some are and some aren't, right? But it's not a generational thing. It's just that, this inflationary thing is driving a wedge between the generations. Because $100,000 house, that sounds great. Selling for $1 million, that sounds great. But they're not the same dollars. In the United States, between the time when my parents married and today, their life savings have been devalued sixfold. That is to say, if they had put in, and this is one of the things, this is one of the big lies, the big scams about retirement savings, mandatory retirement savings accounts to benefit from an employer who employs you full time, and Social Security and all that stuff, is the fact that you think you're getting your money back. You're not. You're not even getting half of it back over the course of your working life. And so if my parents had put in a nest egg of $100 into the bank, or stuffed it under a mattress and just forgot about it for 50 years until they retired, today it would have the purchasing power equivalent of only about $16.50 from back then. So it's like, you just lost 5/6 of your money. The government just literally stole it. But between now and the time you retire,
put silver dollars under their bed.
That would help. In fact, that's the constitutional standard of currency. Joseph Smith actually told us the recipe for combating inflation. He said that the Constitution doesn't say that you are obligated to accept It doesn't say gold and silver coin shall be the currency everywhere. It makes a provision that the states and the local jurisdictions can make their own laws and say that, gold shall be the legal tender of the state of Illinois or something like that. Or you could actually do it at the municipal level. So he actually urged the people of Nauvoo to pass a municipal code that would say, here's our law about what shall be currency, and this is what we'll accept, and it has to be from among gold and or silver coin, and that's it. And if you have that, then you don't have inflation. If people want more money, they got to go mine more precious metal.
Have
Gee, it's like he was inspired or something.
Yeah, but you could insulate it against it at the local level. You don't actually have to wait for the Federal Reserve to stop the printing presses. You just have to have a self-sufficient economy in your local area, and then just pass your own law that says, by the way, gold, we'll accept gold coin here in Nauvoo. We'll accept silver over in Cedar City or wherever. You just create your own law that says this is what we'll accept, and you're not obligated to accept any federal promissory notes.
In 1864, we had absolutely horrible inflation in Nevada. Silver, you couldn't even buy anything with a silver dollar in Virginia City, and it practically brought down kingdoms around the world because silver was so plentiful that it became worthless. Gold was the only thing you could buy anything for in Virginia City. So you can have inflation even with silver and gold. Depends on what kind of mines you get. They just discovered some new mine in China that may hurt the gold markets because they can produce so much gold. So both silver and gold, you can still have inflation. It's just easier to totally control with a press of a button if you have somebody like the Federal Reserve. But as far as income tax goes, income tax is no more theft than tithing is. You're not required to give tithing, but if you do, then you've given it to them. But income tax is voluntary. 1040s are voluntary. Getting a social security number is absolutely voluntary. I have letters from the Social Security Department that says you don't have to have a social security number to either live or work in the United States. And I have a passport from the United States government without a social security number. And my friend, who is David Carmichael, he is in the process of really battling over the social security number issue. And he is being paid a regular check from the United States military because they tried to make him use a social security number as his military ID. And he said, absolutely not. And the other thing that's interesting about the social security number on that issue is that Congress passed a law, which is Title 42, Section 666. I don't know if that number means anything to anybody, but after that law, you literally could not buy or sell without having a social security number unless you don't have a social security number. But if you have one, you have to get it. You have to use it for any license you have. You have to use it on all loans. You have to use it. And then, of course, we're using Federal Reserve notes that we get because we have a job that's tied to a social security number. So literally, the social security number has met, it might not be, but it has met the qualifications of the mark of the beast. So we basically, what we're suffering from in America, including with inflation, because if you do all your contracts with under the gold clause under 31 USC section 5118, you don't have to accept Federal Reserve notes, and you don't have to declare your income using Federal Reserve notes. There's no law that requires you to use a Federal Reserve note to determine the dollar value of your income, and you can use silver dollars or gold dollars to determine the value of your income. And if you do that, if you're married and making the $26,000 limit, you're doing really good because it's worth 35 times more than that. So most people never reach the filing limit.
I always wondered why I had that number, if it was ever going to do me any good, but thanks for letting me know, right? That's so we can add Mark of the Beast to the thumbnail here. That's an interesting topic. Going back to the inflation, though, with silver and so on. I mean, obviously, there's no monetary system. I actually have a video in the works going back to Aristotle's properties of money, just to see what that's like. But yeah, there's no way you can hedge infinitely against serendipity, right? You make something your currency, and somebody has an abundance of it. It's like, well, yeah, time and chance happeneth to them all, right?
Money has been salt. Money has been the sign for money in Chinese is the seashell, because seashells, they used seashells very effectively for money along the Oregon and Washington coast among the Native Americans. So what money is, salt, cattle, whatever, can be money.
Yeah, they did same thing with Munsa Mansa, was a ruler in Africa, Mali, who did I'm not sure if you've heard of him. He did a Hajj to
The richest man that ever lived. Yeah,
That's right. And he brought so much gold with him that he completely devalued gold for 50 years.
absolutely. Very interesting story about him. Yes.
All right. Did we get around all the room yet? I'm losing track of where we're at. So anyone who hasn't given a thought on this, inflation violating property rights? I think we started at the bottom and went all the way up to the top. So we've all given a thought on it. So I'll tell you what, we are like, let's see, I'm getting a blinking message here, maybe? Someone send a chat. Okay. Oh, yes. Thank you. Amy, thank you very much for joining us. I think I was going to say this was our final question that I had planned for the night. My thought was that we could go on to some bonus questions if there was interest, if there was time. But for those who do need to drop off, thank you so much for attending. I do hope to make this a recurring conversation for those who have interest. I want to have some just kind of whoever can come to the panel and talk about human rights issues. I do want to dig into some of these current events, some of which I actually find not only concerning but very alarming. So please join in for these next times. I'll just say this. I honestly think there are a lot of people who are just buying into the theatrics right now. They're just like, wow, there's so much going on social media and with the current administration and everything. And wow, we got everything we wanted. And I'm going to say that's extremely dangerous because I've actually witnessed at the local level as well as the national level, there's actually a movement going on right now to consolidate the branches of government and basically erase checks and balances, as far as I can tell, irreversibly. And that's something I'm like raising the red flag on. I'm like, okay, wait a minute, guys, get out of the intoxicating partisan system. That's part of the reason why I brought that up. In addition to, what are the rights of non-citizens? That's something we need to really understand and process a whole lot better than we do. I didn't really dive as much into that in this discussion, but I think that's another topic we could have for a future episode. And maybe, Amy, if before you drop off, if you would like to contribute, let's just have a little ideation going on right here. What are topics you would like to see in future discussions? If you just want to go around and maybe take 1 minute each and just say, here's what I think is important, here's what you're concerned about.